Welcome back to Face the Nation. Senator Joe Manchin is still with us. Senator, as I mentioned, you were one of 3 Democrats who voted to confirm the Attorney General, Bill Barr, for his post. And you heard in this exclusive interview with my colleague Jan Crawford this week, he said that some of the investigators in the Russia probe may have been misguided and what they did, quote, antithetical to the democratic system. What do you make of that characterization?
Well, first of all, I've basically voted for many of the executive decisions they've made as far as who their appointments would be. I've always felt that the executive should be able to put their team together if the person's qualified, has no background, a criminal background, and has good experience level. Barr met all that. With that, you're saying the decisions he's making and how he's making them now in lieu of Mueller's report. No one's done a more extensive report than Mueller. I was on Intelligence Committee last year, and we've been delving into this for quite some time. But there's been an awful lot of investigations done by honorable people who've done what they felt was the right thing. Mueller, making the decision he made, put it out there. I always wanted to hear from Mueller to come before Congress and hear from his own mind and his own mouth, if you will, what his intentions were, and if he thought he was impeded and could not have gone farther, or did he find anything. I don't think that there was collusion, quid pro quo, but I think there was an awful lot of people that were riding it pretty high for themselves, trying to put themselves in the best position they could to enhance their own wealth, if you will.
You're talking about contact between the Trump campaign and Russia, but in terms of the Attorney General's allegations that the counterintelligence probe was in some way either misguided due to politics or by people thinking they're helping but hurting the country. I mean, that's a pretty strong assertion. Do you regret voting to confirm the Attorney General?
Well, I've said this. If he basically takes the position that he's more the lawyer from the executive point of view and not for the people's point of view, I would have made a mistake. I wanted to hear from Mueller exactly, but now in hearing where he's coming from, it really gives me pause and concern that he's the people's attorney. He should be looking out to protect the Constitution and all of us who are protected by that Constitution.
Well, he argues he is.
And still has to basically be appointed. Yeah. Well, he argues he is. I think he's wrong in that assertion that they were misguided or intentionally going a different direction. I think that Bob Mueller was beyond reproach. I think we all felt that. He was extremely capable, honorable, and did a great job. With that, people don't like him not coming out with more of an definitive, if you will. But I think it was very clear. He said that the rules are you're not going to impeach or bring charges against a sitting president. If that's the case, he's put everything out there. Here's the thing I've said. You've got a little over 17 months to the next election. If you want to go through an impeachment, we get very little done there anyway. Yeah. We'll get nothing done if you go into that. And next of all, there's not one Republican in the Senate that would vote for an impeachment, so why waste your time? You have an election coming up. Voice your opinion there and make your choice. That's where it should be done.
Very quickly, yes or no, do you support the president's tariffs on Mexico?
Oh, no, not the way we're going here. I've said, Mr. President, please, the 2013 major immigration bipartisan bill that we passed is a bill that needs to come back. Please, Mr. President, let's fix immigration and border security. We need both.
Senator Manchin, thank you for joining us. And we will be right back with British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt. President Trump travels to London tonight, and he will be greeted by British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, who is also vying for leadership of the country's Conservative Party and ultimately the title of Prime Minister. He joins us from London. Welcome to Face the Nation. We know that the president has given some interviews ahead of his arrival in the UK, and he said of Boris Johnson, one of your rivals, he would do a very good job. He would be excellent. He's made other comments. Should the president be weighing in on your election?
Well, we've got to know the president a bit over the last few years. Good morning, Margaret, by the way. And we're quite used to the fact that he does the unexpected thing, and it's not going to affect the warmth of the welcome that we give him, because Britain and America are two of the greatest friends you find anywhere on the planet.
In that interview, the president also said he likes you too. And he said that some candidates had asked for his endorsement.
I'll take the compliments where I can get them.
Did you ask him for an endorsement?
No, I have never asked, and I think my job is to represent the British government, and I think the worst thing anyone could imagine is a foreign secretary talking about the future leadership of the country when he's there to represent the current government and the current prime minister.
And I want to ask you about your work in that. The president had made some comment about Meghan Markle, referring to her as nasty for comments she made about him back in 2016.
I didn't know that she was nasty.
Is any of this going to disrupt the welcome?
I don't think it's going to disrupt the welcome at all, because I think the other thing we've learned from the president is that regularly we have to agree to disagree. And there's a whole list of things that we don't agree with the administration on, but it doesn't affect the fact that we have the most important partnership that there is in the world for freedom, democracy, the rule of law, the things that really matter. And that's what we're celebrating.
I want to ask you about one of the things that the UK and the US have had some disagreement on, and that is the threat posed by Iran. The UK had wanted the US to stay part of that international deal to freeze Iran's nuclear program. Obviously, the president did not.
Well, we've never disagreed with the US about the threat posed by Iran. And we see the intelligence that the US sees. We have a very close intelligence sharing relationship, and we see the destabilization that's happening in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, across the Middle East, the Yemen as well. And so we completely agree that something has to be done to stop that, because this is one of the most fragile regions on the planet. But we do want to make sure that Iran doesn't go nuclear. And we think that if Iran acquired nuclear weapons, other countries in the region would be likely to follow suit, and that could be very, very dangerous. And so we have a very honest discussion. That's why we signed up with the previous administration to the Iran nuclear deal.
Is the UK supporting the US campaign to put more pressure on Iran?
We absolutely recognize we need to put more pressure on Iran, and we agree that the status quo, even with the lack of nuclear weapons in Iran, the status quo is not sustainable when you have incredibly tense situations.
The U.S. has filed an extradition request with your government to have Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, here in the United States to face justice. We know UN officials raised concerns about human rights violations if he's sent here. Does your government take that seriously?
Julian Assange is someone who is alleged to have committed some very serious crimes, alleged to have led to people's deaths. And so it is absolutely right that he faces justice, and he has no more reason to escape justice than anyone else who's alleged to have committed crimes. So I think what's happened is the right thing.
So if you do become prime minister, you would not stand in the way of an extradition of Assange to the United States?
Well, we would have to follow our own legal processes, just as the US has to follow its own legal processes. But do I think, would I want to stand in the way of Julian Assange facing justice? No, I would not.
President Trump has said one of the things he does want to speak to your current Prime Minister, Theresa May, about is the threat posed by China, and specifically this company, Huawei, which I know the UK has not made a decision as yet as to whether this firm would be allowed to help build out your internet, the 5G network. But Secretary Pompeo has said if you don't take this seriously, the U.S. might not be able to share intelligence anymore with the United Kingdom. Why hasn't the UK agreed to what the US is asking?
Well, we are taking it very seriously. We have some of the best cybersecurity capability in the world, and we'd never take a decision that affected our intelligence sharing capability with the United States. And we have to look at the technical issues, which are around whether buying products from a specific country could be a backdoor to espionage, and we're looking at those very carefully. But we also have to look at the strategic issue, which is that China's been very open. They've said they want to have an 80% market share of telecoms technology. In other areas like artificial intelligence, they want a 90% market share by 2025. And we have to ask, as Western countries, whether it's wise to allow one country to have such a commanding monopoly in the technologies that we're all of us going to be depending on. So those are very, very important discussions that we continue to have.
It sounds like you may be considering that. one of the things that the president has also said he wants to bring up with Prime Minister May is it seems his continued concern that the UK may have in some way or another worked with the CIA or FBI regarding what he calls the Russian hoax. He made these comments just last week. How does your government respond to this allegation? I know the GCHQ, British intelligence, has previously denied it, but the president still suspects it.
You know, we have a very close intelligence sharing relationship, and our default is always to say yes to our closest ally. If America asks us to do things, you guys are doing so much to defend Europe and defend freedom across the world. You know, we would want to be cooperative, but we would always do so within due process, and we would never do anything improper. And we don't have any secrets, so we're happy to discuss these things. But one of the things that I'll certainly be discussing with the President and Secretary of State Pompeo is our concern about the growing strategy we seem to be seeing from Russia to interfere in democratic processes in free countries.
But do I understand you saying there that the UK has not yet been asked by the US for help in the probe the Attorney General in this country is carrying out, but you continue to deny that there was any work with the CIA or FBI on the so-called Russian hoax?
Margaret, you'll forgive me if I talk in generalities, but we obviously don't talk in the media about specific requests over intelligence sharing, except to say what I've just said, which is that we would always try and work closely and helpfully with our greatest ally, because we recognise the important role you play in the world, and we would never, of course, do anything improper or seek to interfere with another country's electoral processes.
Mr. Foreign Secretary, good luck with your busy visit. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Margaret.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Nation. It's time now for some political analysis. Ramesh Ponnuru is senior editor at National Review and a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief of USA Today. Jamal Simmons is a host on Hill TV and a Democratic strategist. And Jan Crawford is our CBS News chief legal correspondent. And Jan, you had the interview of the week with the Attorney General and his first reaction after Robert Mueller spoke publicly about the report. I think a question a lot of Americans have is, how did this go on for 2 years and the Attorney General and the special counsel had two very different ideas of what could be accomplished in this investigation?
Oh, well, you're talking about why the special counsel said, I can't make a conclusion on whether or not the president obstructed justice because of this existing Office of Legal Counsel opinion about indicting sitting presidents. And I think it's interesting because when the special counsel met with the Attorney General and his team on March 5th, they were told at that point that he was not going to reach a conclusion on whether or not the president obstructed justice. They weren't even going to get into that analysis. And I was told by other sources in the department that there was some confusion on the behalf of the Attorney General and his team about why. They didn't really understand some of the reasoning that they were hearing from the special counsel at that point about why he wasn't going to make a decision on obstruction. The report was not finished at that point. They were still working on it. So they just decided to wait and see what the report said. And then when they got the report with no conclusion in there, they decided they would look at the law, analyze the facts in the law, and make the decision themselves. But there was a lot in that report that surprised them, or rather, I should say, that was not in the report. They also expected the special counsel to go through and identify the confidential grand jury information so that they could quickly release a version of the report to the public. And they had been told that that was being done over a period of weeks. And so when they got the report, that was also a surprise that that information had not been identified, which would have meant that a 4-page summary that was released later on would have been unnecessary by the Attorney General.
Up to this point, though, the one thing that seems agreed upon on both sides of the aisle has been, with the exception of the president, that Robert Mueller was extremely well qualified to carry all of this out. Why now, at this point, is the case essentially being made that he had unfinished business, or that some of the technicalities of what you just laid out are calling some of this into question?
Well, I think there's some disappointment. People were looking for Robert Mueller, this man, like you said, who was highly regarded, a man of integrity, to come in and say, here's the answers. here's what we need to do, American people, and let's just either resolve it or move on. And then when this kind of seemed to be unresolved on whether or not the president obstructed justice, it was unsatisfactory to a lot of people, especially when you think about the time and money that was spent on this investigation. Now, some people have said and asked why, when the Attorney General got this report, why didn't he send it back and say, you didn't finish the job? And I think we can all understand what that might have looked like. It surely would have leaked that the Attorney General wasn't happy with the special counsel's report, told him to rethink it. So the Justice Department and the team really decided we're just going to stay out of it. This is Robert Mueller's work. This is his decision and his conclusions, and now we're going to take it from there.
Jamal, James Comey, the former FBI director, tweeted about this interview that Jan conducted that Bill Barr offers no facts. An AG should not be echoing conspiracy theories. He should gather facts and show them. This is what justice is about. This seems to push back specifically on this implication that he was misguided and other investigators were. Are we at the point of conspiracy theories? Is this a legitimate criticism?
It does feel like we're at the point of conspiracy theory, but remember, the AG came out on the very first day and used words like collusion, which Robert Mueller said in the very beginning of his report, he did not investigate collusion because it wasn't a legal term. He investigated criminal conspiracies. So there is some question about what really the AG is up to and who it is he is defending here. Is he looking out for the American people or looking out for the president? The reality is Mueller laid out a case. He listed at least 10 instances of possible obstruction of justice, including the most salient of which appears to be the time the president ordered the White House counsel to go and fire the special counsel and then asked him to come up with a fake document to prove that he did not order him to go fire the special counsel. The Republicans are talking about process here to keep from having to talk about the substance of the report.
Ramesh, how do you respond to that?
Both of our major political parties in 2016 ran presidential candidates under FBI investigation. And that is going to create strain on the system, and we are seeing that strain continue to play out. I think that Attorney General Barr is quite right, as he said in Jan's interview, that it is a big deal when a presidential campaign is put under surveillance, and it is perfectly reasonable to ask questions about whether, as he puts it, it was adequately predicated. You'll notice that Virginia Democratic Senator Mark Warner, earlier on the show, although he was quite critical of Barr, said, have at it with respect to that investigation. Go find those facts. And I think that that's a reasonable position to take.
Yeah, but you know, you certainly get the impression that Barr was speaking as the president's lawyer, not as the country's lawyer. He adopted even some of the most controversial things that the president has said, including suggesting that there were nefarious reasons for this investigation to be launched at the beginning. And you almost got Joe Manchin, one of the few Democrats who voted for William Barr, to say he regretted that vote. He didn't quite go there, but it said it gave him pause. He clearly had concerns about the point of view that the Attorney General adopted in talking about this very important issue.
And I mean, Jan, when in that particular line, antithetical to our democracy, the Attorney General did not present to you any evidence to back that up. It's a hunch.
I tried.
I know you did. You did an extraordinary job.
He said he wasn't going to go there. He said he has seen things that he believes merit investigation, whether it's the timeline and how this investigation was launched and what was done at a certain time, or whether it was things afterward and meetings that occurred in Trump Tower after the election, but he wouldn't confirm or deny any of that. He did make the point, though, and I think this is important to keep in mind, he started his career in the CIA in the 1970s, and that was in the wake of tremendous abuses by our intelligence agencies, investigations into civil rights organizations and American citizens. So his point to me over and over was that we have to look at these investigations into an unprecedented investigation into a presidential campaign to see if abuses occurred. What is wrong with that? So he's saying, I'm taking this, again, his words, I'm looking into this now to make sure that it was followed properly, that rules and procedures were followed, and if not, why not? And so, again, to your point, Ramesh, that is very much what he said throughout the interview, that we're taking a look at this and the facts. Maybe it was legitimate. And he said that in the interview too. Maybe it was legitimate. Maybe they had to handle it with this very small group of high-ranking officials at headquarters instead of the normal practice. And maybe there was a reason for that.
What's interesting is he is saying here that he wants to look into whether or not they were spying, but he did make a determination of no obstruction of justice without looking at any of the underlying evidence, only reading the report. At least that's what he told the Senate committee that asked him.
Which is its own fight right now on the Hill. But Ramesh, I want to ask you, because you wrote about basically that it might be a miscalculation by the Speaker of the House not to move forward with impeachment proceedings, which that pressure was added to this week with Mueller's comments.
That's right. You know, it's an interesting thing that even though Mueller didn't actually tell us anything that he hadn't already told us in the report, it did seem to add fuel to the calls for impeachment on the Democratic side. I think Nancy Pelosi has made a judgment. There's a presidential race coming up. We're not going to get impeachment acted on by the Senate because Republicans control it, and he requires a 2/3 vote to remove the president. But I do wonder whether you can run a campaign which is, as Pelosi herself said yesterday, we're going to expose the corruption of this president, the wrongdoing of this president. If you say he's a wrongdoer, you say he's corrupt, can you not follow that up by impeachment? Doesn't it really undercut your message if you're not willing to follow through?
But if it ultimately fails, and the Speaker, Susan, said this has to be ironclad, what is the purpose?
Yeah, well, that's the debate that she's having with Democrats. You know, her problem is we now have more than 50 House Democrats supporting the beginning of an impeachment inquiry. So that number continues to rise. But none of those members are among the 41 House Democrats who flipped Republican seats in 2018 and gave the majority to the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives. And that is a dilemma, because the lack of overlap between the Democratic base being eager for impeachment and swing voters, some of them Democrats, some of them independents, who are opposed to impeachment or who really want Democrats to focus on issues that affect them in their own lives, that is the conundrum that Nancy Pelosi faces.
Jamal, what did some of us were watching?
I'm chomping at the bit on this one.
I'm sure you are, but I do want to get your feedback on what you saw from some of the Democratic candidates this weekend out in California.
So we saw the candidates out in California, I think, really speak up and say that they were ready for impeachment. This has been a growing thing. Elizabeth Warren and Julian Castro were among the first to say they were for it, and now it seems to be a fire that's making its way through the entire...
It's an easy thing to say, though.
Sure it is, because the Democratic electorate wants it. And you asked the question about what does it prove. You know, Elijah Cummings on this air a few weeks ago said, this is their watch. It's up to them, and history will be looking back at both the House and the Republicans in the Senate. And it is not the Democrats' job to absolve the Republicans from their constitutional responsibility. It's the Democrats' job to live up to their constitutional responsibility if they find wrongdoing.
Does this happen?
What happen? Impeachment? I would bet that there will be some effort to hold the president accountable. What it looks like in the end, maybe a censure, maybe impeachment, I don't think he gets off scot-free.
All right. Well, plenty more to talk about, but we have to leave it there. Thank you, Jan. Congrats on the interview. We'll be back in a moment. That's it for us today. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan. We leave you this week with a tribute to the 12 victims who were killed at a Virginia Beach municipal building this Friday.